This is Jeremy Garcia of Linux Questions. Yes, I'm Robin Miller here for Phosphorus, and we've been wanting to talk with Jeremy for a good long time. And finally, here we are. So, Jeremy, what's it like to be old enough to, or your site, to have a site old enough it can get a driver's license?
I didn't even think about it that way. It's glad to have made it here. It's, as I've said, in previous interviews, it's the site has grown well beyond my initial expectations, and it's great to be here after 16 years, still growing strong and still doing well, still doing what we love to do.
And working on many more distros than in the beginning.
Yeah, quite a few more.
And I notice you're not a Linux purist. I see BSD and other Unix forums as well, do I not?
You do. We actually used to run bsdquestions.org as well, and it just didn't have quite enough traffic to keep it as a standalone site, so we rolled it in. So now there's multiple BSD and other Unix forums on the site. I'm more of an open source guy. I mean, Linux is what I use and what I really kind of have an affinity for myself, but certainly they're all welcome at LQ. What
distro do you use?
So I'm a little bit all over the map, depending on whether it's desktop, whether it's server. Right now, the desktop that I'm recording this on is Ubuntu.
Okay.
But I've run in the past. I started with Yggdrasil, and I've run at one time or another most of them from there. So
I'm another one. I change about every year just to know what's going on.
Right. Yeah.
You know, what distro are you using? I don't know. It depends. So how did you get into it? Why did you start Linux Questions?
So in the late 90s, I had gotten my first kind of real Linux job where I was kind of supporting myself with Linux and open source and thought it was really great. And the more I got into the community, I thought it was a really great community that I genuinely wanted to give something back to. So I started the site in 2000 just as kind of a way to give something back to a community that I thought had given me a lot. And I always thought maybe someday I'll get 100 members and it'll be great. I'll get to help a few people. And, right. And then it's obviously grown quite a bit from there. So, but that's why I started it. Yeah.
So how many members do you have?
So as far as how many I register right now, it's just under 600,000. But if you have never posted ever and aren't active for years, we kind of reclaim your username. We try to avoid that AOL problem, for lack of a better term, for what I want to call it, so that you don't have to have a username that's kind of, Robin724 _ Bradenton or something. So, but the only accounts we ever delete are those without posts and those that aren't active. I think all said, probably we had about 800,000 people have registered at some point.
Wow, that's still a considerable number. Way ahead of anything, way ahead of the Linux counter, in fact.
Really?
I believe.
That doesn't sound right.
I think it has about 500,000. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I know. I've been on the Linux counter and Linux Questions since, the beginning. So I would know.
There you go.
I calculate stats like that. So it grew. Does it cost you a lot of money to run it?
No, I mean, for a while now, it's been pretty self-sustaining, and it's been a pretty big effort on my part to make sure that it is self-sustaining, because it's important to me, because we've been around so long, the repository of knowledge that lives at LQ really is pretty substantial, and I'm very committed to keeping that available to the community for the long term.
Huge database.
So sustainability is something I think about a lot.
How huge a database is it?
In what regard? As far as, the number of questions, the number of posts we have is just under 6 million, which means about 1 million threads ish. Okay.
What do people ask?
There's really no bound to the questions that we get, from very, new user oriented stuff is a lot of it, obviously, but some very technical, in-depth stuff as well. So we run the gamut from desktop to server to enterprise to pretty much you name it. It's been asked at least once at this point, almost.
Okay. So if I was telling somebody, you should try this Linux thing here's an Ubuntu DVD, stick it in, see what happens. Should I say also go to linuxquestions.org to help learn?
Absolutely. Yes. I would say so, but I'm obviously a little bit of a biased source, I would guess.
What are your income sources, I need to ask?
Pretty much just advertising. The way that we kind of the way that I approach that is if you are a member and you log in, you basically see no advertising after you have a couple posts. If you're part of the community, there's no reason to be showing you an ad. You know, if you kind of search on Google, drive by, get an answer, we'll show you a couple ads, and that's how we pretty much sustain ourselves. We do have some other stuff. We sell some merchandise and things like that, but none of them are really big revenue drivers. It's kind of a conscious decision that I didn't want it to turn into a job because I want it to be something else. So I'm sure we could probably monetize or whatever it is better. It's just not something that we really aim to do.
Well, Craig Newmark isn't making all he can either.
Right.
And he's not starving. Are you married? Do you have children and all that?
I do not, no, which makes it a little bit easier, I suppose.
Well, if you did, I'm sure they would eat. How do you make a living?
So I kind of do the classic doc serials. I make money not with LQ, but because of LQ. Because I'm the LQ guy, I do some consulting and get some other stuff around that based on the fact that I'm the LQ guy, kind of.
What kind of consulting do you get? I'm curious. Who wants, in case somebody's watching this and wants to hire you?
So it's kind of gone in a couple different directions over the years. I do some technical stuff as far as scaling web applications and that kind of stuff. And then I also do some community building, community management kind of non-technical stuff as well. So it's been a varying mix of both over the years that kind of ebbs and flows.
Okay. A while after you came on the scene. Now, I was running Linux.com for years, of course, besides working on Slashdot. Yep. And one thing it seems to me is there was like a period where it seemed everybody who installed Linux, the next week they wanted to have a Linux website.
Yeah.
That seems
there's definitely a time period for that.
That seems to have calmed down. Now, Phosphorus is actually one of the newer ones.
Right.
You know, what other new ones do you know of that are worth a darn that we should post or promote?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know that I know the answer to that off the top of my head. I think a lot of it is before, if you wanted your own site, there was no good way to do it besides making your own site. And now with things like Reddit and Medium and other stuff, I think it's just people are coalescing around existing communities that allow you to have your own kind of area of that community as opposed to putting up their own site. I think that's where you're seeing some of the migration. And some of it's, of course, going to Twitter and Google Plus and things like that as well.
Even Facebook.
Even Facebook, I suppose, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know. Are you on Facebook?
I am. I don't use it a lot. It's more to see pictures of my niece and stuff like that than it is anything else.
That's a good reason. Google Plus, I've seen you on there.
Yeah, so for whatever reason, while Google Plus has not had a ton of popularity, especially in the Linux kernel community, but in the Linux community in general, it seems to be one of the heavier users of Google Plus for whatever reason. So
yes,
that I use a little bit more.
I would say the more technical people are, the more likely they are to be on Google Plus.
I would agree with that, definitely.
Even if they're using it, you find you use, just out of curiosity, it's a tangent, do you use Google Plus mostly professionally or socially or what?
Professionally, definitely.
Really?
Yeah, I use it for Linux stuff much more than I do for non-Linux stuff, yeah.
Okay. If
you use it personally more, I take it by your response.
No, I'm sort of half and half.
Oh, okay.
So I can't really say. I'm not a heavy user. I use it.
Yeah, I'm not a heavy user either, I would say.
I haven't been on Google Plus for, I don't know, an hour. So, hey, if you were going to start Linux questions today, number one, would you? Number two, would you do anything different?
Well, you're always going to do different stuff, right? Lessons learned. I can't imagine anyone's made every decision correctly in a way that they would not do something different at some point. Whether I would do it again, that's a good question. Why I started it, one of the reasons I started it when I did, is that I wanted there to be a community for Linux users where new members and old members alike would be able to have a place that's friendly and active. And I didn't see that existing at the time, so I created it. Whether there's a place like that now, I guess I wouldn't know because LQ is kind of where I hang out on the Linux side of things. So if that situation without LQ in the landscape still existed, I would definitely start it again. And I certainly am glad in retrospect that I started it. That's for sure. Not
necessarily an identical site. We already have LQ. We don't need LQ2. But if somebody wants to start a Linux site now, any advice?
My big thing once again is sustainability. I would say before you start your own Linux site, make sure that there is a need and you're going to do something, and it's not just a whim and you're going to create good information and then a year from then it's going to go away. Because there's a lot of that, and it's a shame when
Yes.
good information like that goes away. So if you're in it for the long term and you're passionate about it, you should absolutely start one, regardless of if Linux or otherwise. I mean, that's really what makes the web great, right? Is passionate people doing cool things with very little restriction. But to make sure you really want to do it for the long term. And if you don't, make sure you put it somewhere where it will at least stay online and be available to people, because it's a lot of work to create good content, and it's a shame when it goes to waste.